Hi, my name is Eduardo Fernández. I'm a PhD student at the European University Institute in Florence, and I'm currently a TNA fellow at the UNED, Universidad de Educación a Distancia, in Madrid, where I have been working in a project, distant reading of early modern prophecies, corpus formation and testing. My training in digital humanities and computational literary studies is a bit spotty and heterogeneous. I come from classics, but then I converted to cultural slash intellectual history. Um, and because of the topic of my PhD, where I had to engage with a text where the attribution of authorship was contested and problematic, it's this kind of revelations very common in the early modern period. I started dipping in some small training, some small summer schools or workshops on stellometry. And it was a slippery slope, which from stellometry led to XML, which from XML led to Python, and slowly but steadily has especially shown all the different things that are being done out there. And it's consisted mostly of small courses and seminars and workshops. For me, my engagement with digital humanities and digital tools has been one that has spread out over time of, I would say, 1 to 2 years. And it's been so slow, especially because it's been something that I've genuinely engaged with out of interest. It hasn't been something that I needed to do, but I was forced to do as part of the curriculum. And it was in the course of those perhaps 2 years that I kept both engaging with what I knew, but also trying new things and seeing things that I would arguably not be interested in the beginning, but that would like help me think about potential avenues of work. And in fact, one of the moments for that was the CLS training school in Madrid, because in a way, until then, I was very narrow-minded about stylometry. That's what I needed for my thesis, and that was the extent of my engagement with it. But after it, and after this like wide array of sessions that I wouldn't have originally thought about, from about thinking about arranging the user interface and the visualization of data, to talking about like language models and what they actually can do for a historian or a philologist. These are things that I would not normally have done out of interest myself, but by being in an environment where there was some of what I wanted and some that I didn't know of, that really helped me expand. In the old days of that social network called Twitter. And I think it was the result, maybe memory fails me, but I attended a winter school funded by Daria in Austria about digitization of the pre-modern book material aspects. And I think as a part of that, I entered this network of people that were active in digital humanities. And I think as a result of that, I started hearing about CLS, and I knew of some of the members, namely Maciej Eder, through my previous interest in stylometry, especially Latin stylometry. But it wasn't an acquaintance that made me know CLS Infra. It was mostly through this sort of networking at previous events with people that are also interconnected with. My research has been, during my PhD, has focused on the circulation of a text that is known as Apocalypsis Nova, which means nothing else than new revelation. And it describes these visions of a Franciscan friar in early 16th century Rome, where they discuss the Bible with an angel, and they discuss like some prophecies and so on. So again, my dissertation has been studying a prophecy, a single prophecy that was like very popular and that was used, read, censored, and engaged with in general very, very, very often throughout the 16th and 17th century. And as a result of that, I raised some conclusions about how this object or this, let's call it this object of prophetic speech and prophetic discourse, how did this work in the early modern period? And the basis for me was the study of over 100 manuscripts and their like marginal notes and censorship, inquisitorial trials. And at the end of this, one of the thoughts that I had and that often came up in discussions about my work was these are very interesting conclusions, but they to some extent only apply to a single work. It's not that they only apply to a single text, but with your work now, you're showing this case study. It remains to be seen how the rest of the field works and behaves in this sense. In other words, does all of what you say apply also for other prophecies or revelations? And to some extent, my project here as a TNA fellow is an attempt to answer that question, meaning there are many issues that we could speak for hours about it, but for instance, one of the many issues with prophecies in the early modern period has to do with their instability, the ways they can change form, the ways they appear, reappear, are translated, and this also leads to a very confusing landscape of text, which makes it a beautiful literary object to work on. But in a way, this project has given me time to start fixing, not in the philological sense, but start fixing some of these texts to the ground and getting text versions to work with them. A lot of the work has been very manual and very cumbersome in that sense. But the ultimate goal of gathering these prophecies and developing this like small, minute sort of concept proofing, concept testing corpus is to transcend the limitations of what I was doing in my dissertation, which is talk about a single text in a single moment and say, okay, what happens when you look at, say, 100 prophecies from the 16th century? What happens in terms of semantics? What happens in terms of linguistics? What order would we speak of linguistic features of prophetic speech? Then there's the question of how do you define prophetic speech or prophetic discourse, and what grants a text the right to enter this corpus. That's a separate conversation. But in a way, the connection between my dissertation and the TNA fellowship has been quite strong, meaning it's been transcending the limitations of the usual case study in intellectual and cultural history to see really what distant reading and digital tools can do for you. So one of the reasons that I found myself so comfortable at the UNED is that after the training school took place there, and after I had a chance to engage with the organizers who are also the host team for the TNA fellowship, I immediately found common points of interest, a lot of support in conversations for different parts of different projects that I was struggling with, from writing a little bit of code to do this thing and extract this text from here for a different thing, to thinking about the potential uses of LLMs for some things I wanted to do. So what I found was immediately a very supportive, very available group of people. And I also think that I'm sadly not familiar with the rest of the teams that host TNA fellows elsewhere. But from my little initial research, what I found also is that there is a very interesting balance of both a very strong technical knowledge, because I'm based at the Faculty of Informatics, which is very shocking and very nice for me. But also it has to do with the previous work they've done, from developing ontologies that meant that when I first got here, I got a whole class of ontologies of information, bibliographical ontologies, and things that were obviously beyond my little philologist brain when I first arrived. Still a small philological brain, haven't grown that much, but a little bit. From both this kind of thing to also they have worked with they've developed projects that while they might not be necessarily linked to what I do, I feel like they have a very good balance of a very strong technical knowledge, but also there's a philologist in the team as a postdoc who has been helping me, who's familiar with problems that I don't need to explain now, what's a graphic variant or normalizing this or that. So it's been a very knowledgeable group, and from the beginning, it was just an extremely easygoing conversation.